Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad that you are joining us for this event. My name is Susie Q. Smith, and I work with The Word, which is a nonprofit organization working to build a publishing community that will fight for inclusivity. Our mission is to promote voices from underserved communities and diverse backgrounds, to honor the stories of those who have faced adversity and injustice, and to provide a sanctuary space where these groups will see themselves in literature. Brought to you by The Word, Margins was created by and for people on the margins, promoting the inclusive representation of experiences in literature for communities who have historically been excluded. The first of its kind, Margins is a biannual conference, book fair, and literary festival happening in Denver and online wherever you are, August 5th to the 7th, 2022 this year. Margins brings together writers, storytellers, and wordsmiths at all levels of experience to explore emerging trends in literature and the many approaches to storytelling, visioning and creating, education, inclusion, advocacy, organizing, and building community. And you're going to get a little preview of some of what that looks like this evening in our conversation with our writers. So to learn more about how to get involved, if you want to learn more about The Word, if you want to learn more about Margins, check out our website at thewordfordiversity.org. So tonight, we're so excited to welcome our guests this evening, Addie Tsai, M. McDonough, and L Cordero, all of whom write in more than one genre and use a number of artistic approaches to inform their work. Each of our guests will offer a reading of their work, followed by discussion about their approaches to craft and expanding their writing practice beyond traditionally defined literary categories, and of course, wherever our questions take us. We'll be dropping links in the chat for their books, their websites, their social media, and if you have any questions, also feel free to put them in the chat. Now let's meet our guests. So tonight we will hear first from L Cordero. L Cordero is a sci-fi fantasy author, poet, and horror dabbler working out of Denver, Colorado. They aim to write intriguing stories that center characters from marginalized communities without making identity the crux of the story. With their poetry, they seek to heal generational wounds and empower readers to reclaim authorship over their lives. Their work can be found in Prometheus Dreaming Magazine, Post Journal, Deviant by Ink Feathers Publishing, and the anthology Denver Noir by Akashic Books. They are also the voice of Crocogus in the audio drama Harbor. In their advocacy work, Cordero has performed for institutions such as Denver Health Medical Center, Yale University, and the Transgender Center of the Rockies. When not storytelling, Cordero can also be found wrangling their blind pit bull, obsessing over their ever-expanding garden, and binging old-school anime. So welcome, L Cordero. I'm so excited to hear what you're going to read to us this evening. How are you feeling tonight?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for inviting me to do this tonight, Susie. I'm really happy to be here.
I'm so glad to see your face, and I'm glad you're here too. So thank you again for sharing your work with us tonight.
Absolutely. Well, good evening, everyone. As you heard, I am L Cordero. My pronouns are they, them, theirs in English and ella in Spanish. I'm going to be pulling a Sour Patch Kid today, a little sour before the sweet. There's been much to contend with for trans and queer communities in the past couple of weeks. This poem is Juvia. It represents what I think about these trash laws that are passing nationwide. And for the people in the back, supporting gay and trans kids is not child abuse. This is Juvia. I pray for rain when scorching and salting earth. I pray for rain at the burials and rebirth. I pray for rain standing on blood-stained streets, knowing that I am the water. I am who will drown those who have taken mine from me, because just as we rivers are precious and crucial, so too are we when troubled, capable of undoing worlds. Praised be the silver hairs dotting our temples. Blessed be the fine lines gracing our skin. Lauded are the aches within the bones, allowing us to sit upon conquered years. Proof we are determined to be elders before becoming ancestors. We will dig these withering fingers deeper into the fabric of this life until whoever tries to rip us from it unravels their own future. They do not understand the power of undead things living through daily death. What hasn't motherfucking died in here? What haven't we buried, dug up, and buried again? We are the rushing waters that cannot be conquered, rapids churning with voices that will not be silenced, currents filled with sharpened bones, and depths so great they hold all life and death within their wake. Who stands before this ocean and believes themselves greater? Vengeful bitch is God. Vengeful bitch is true. Vengeful bitch is good to you if you are good to them. We are the water, standing on blood-stained streets, praying for rain at the burials and rebirth, praying for rain when scorching and salting earth. Moving into more of the sweet, I'm going to be focusing on trans and queer joy for the rest of my set. This first one is called Aniversario. It's going to be published in the Transliteration magazine that's coming out later this year. That's all the authors involved are trans. So this is Aniversario. She pruned the overgrown, unruly buds, priming stems to branch out and sing with 12 pounds gone. She drained the blood and tissue so that they could wrap their new beloved in gauze, bandage, and tape, healing their pride in cocoon before letting loose the veil and smiling to air's caress. This one I wrote for the 2nd year anniversary of my top surgery. It was a life-changing surgery, and I'm grateful to be here because of it. This next piece I'm going to read is a section from my short story, Starfire and Water, which I submitted to the LeVar Burton contest, and it made the top 100, which I'm exceedingly proud of. I was pulling for LeVar to read my words, but you'll hear them tonight anyway. This is an FF romance that blends solar punk and indigenous futurism. From Starfire and Water. It's still a lot of ground to cover, Samira interrupted, and we don't have until the closing ritual. The potisas were sitting on the altars, right? Our moms are supposed to light candles and incense for the semillas soon. They'll notice if a potisa is missing. Yadi stiffened. She looked ready to cry again. Samira grabbed her hand. Let's ask the forest to show us. She blinked, like in the stories. Like how our peoples did before the rift. She turned into Samira. You know how? She smiled. Our bohique taught me. She pulled Yari into an alley between gargantuan roots. You know, softness isn't weakness. She cupped her hand around Yari's cheek, caught the tears. I'm glad you have the courage to cry. To be in touch with what you feel here. She placed her hand over Yadi's heart. For our ask to work, we need you to be in touch. We need a water offering from the keepers of the water themselves. Yadi went quiet. Then she laughed. It was a lovely sound. For you, I would pour my body into tears. They sat upon the ground, Yadi holding Samira's hands under her face. She let the depths stored in her flow, tears, rivers streaming into Samira's palms. She'd taken 2 lives during the last fight between Taita and Ata'in. Sometimes she saw their faces in the shadows, asking her why. She had no answer. Just like her uncle didn't either when she asked him why. No answers stopped pain from being pain. Yadi grieved the deaths she'd given to people who looked like Samira. She grieved the deaths gifted to her own people by those who looked like Samira. She lowered her hands to the ground alongside the woman who'd shown her spirit, letting her mourning seep into the earth. Help me find it. Help us see it. May we know the way to La Potisa that spares ill fate. The moon broke free from clouds, fell over their bodies. The constellations Yari fell in love with sparkled along the black of Samira's skin. As she held onto the hands filled with moons and stars, her brown skin changed too. Waves swelled and ebbed, crashed against the lines of her hagua. The ground pulsed under their hands, a heartbeat that pounded like the drums of the taita and atain. The pounding spread under Yari's hips. It beat northward, toward the tent, toward the peoples, toward the ancestors. Yari's oceans were drawn into roots, the trees drinking her into their rings, funneling her into their leaves, green that breathed her out. Vapor she rose, raindrops she fell. Dew upon earth becoming heavy, sinking back to roots that absorbed her into systems that spread across the earth. Tree that knows, Samira conjured, accept our offering. This last poem is entitled Serás. You are as you have always been. Y también eres new. Tattered secrets and stained colors your fingers wove into vestments, donned now into sunlight, frayed edges glittering like gold. Your muddied bare feet ran, stumbled, hurried to stand firm. You keep la tierra vencida between your palms, transforming dust into pearl. You are both grave and garden. Your fractured pieces yield new life. Ferns birthed from death's outgrown, spread like wings behind your back. You are as you have always been. Y también eres new. And should they ask you for your name, responderás que eres tú. Thank you very much.
Oh, those were beautiful, beautiful pieces. And you made me cry already. So thank you for that in the most delicious way. Thank you so much for sharing your writing with us tonight. And I look forward to talking with you more about those poems. Of course, anyone, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And now I'm going to introduce our next reader, M. McDonough. M. McDonough is someone I typically call McDonough the Stunner, but they didn't put that in their bio, so I just feel like it's my responsibility to say so. M. McDonough is a queer and trans poet from Denver, Colorado. They are pursuing an MFA in poetry at Arizona State University. M credits their relationship to poetry with their early exposure to slam and spoken word spaces, growing up in Denver venues like the Mercury Cafe and Slam Nuba, We Got Heads. They participated in multiple slam teams, placing fourth at the National Poetry Slam in 2014 with Slam Nuba. They also coached Minor Disturbance, No Bedtime, Youth Poetry Slam for several years, working with teams who regularly placed top 10 at the Brave New Voices Youth Poetry Slam. As a writer, their work focused on questions of trans poetics, desire, grief, pop culture, and humor. In 2020, they received a Pushcart nomination for their poem Gender Reveal Party, published by Exposition Review. Their poems can be found at Suspect Press, Name and None, Prickly Pear Press, Button Poetry, and others. They live in Phoenix, Arizona with their partner and can be found watching nature documentaries, cartoons, or Real Housewives. And without further ado, I would like to welcome McDonough the Stunner. The M is for me, and I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Susie. I'd forgotten what I wrote in that bio, but it sounds perfect coming from you. Thank you, DL, for starting us off like this. I feel so honored to be in the presence of such amazingness. I was just looking over my set list and I started to get really nervous because I haven't had to make a set list in like 4 years. So I really wanted to focus on like play and kind of the intersections that I'm really interested in right now. So yeah, so this is my first poem. Wolverine gives a toast at your wedding. Well, here we all are, I guess. I've been thinking a lot about love. You know, it isn't easy, but I have a few stories. Like, once I cut my dick off just to see what would happen. It hurt like hell. But the next morning, all the scaffolding had filled back in, faithful anthill. And one time, Storm pegged me in a hurricane. She wore this steel cock, and when the lightning struck it, we both came rain and blood. It's like I have been a movable feast for every lover. No tooth left unpulled, no scrap of skin original. When Mystique fucked me as myself, that was the only time. Looking into my own eyes, I had to utter my safe word. And that is the cruelest edge of this magic. No matter what, I am myself. No matter how much it hurts, I can let people do whatever they want to me. So, listen. Celebrate. You found someone who could wound you, but you know never would. Celebrate. You found someone you don't have to be magic for, just to survive. Okay, that was a poem. A weird poem. It's really exciting to me to like get to share this space and to get to kind of offer up stuff that I don't usually do. On that note, I've been thinking a lot about transition and kind of the narratives that exist around it, and I'm really interested in crafting, you know, like the fantastic around transition, and so this is one poem surrounding that. It's called Testosterone. You preen before windows, delighting in your new teeth, sprouting wherever they may, between your eyes or chittering down your chin, side effects to the side effects. You read about this. Your voice deepens, as does your shadow. You become so dense, owls follow you, hunting stray cats in your night wake. It is no wonder you adore each new hole unfurling in your skin. They hum to you at night. You press your fingers into them, Thomas into Christ's side. The skin under your skin is scales. Soon, all that's left of you will be edges, rows of canines sharpened against one another. Okay, thank you. I lost one of the poems that I was going to do seems to be gone from my list, so that's fine. This is, I'm gonna, you know, after DL, it's gonna be a little sour, and we're gonna go back to sweet. Gender reveal party. I threw myself a gender reveal party. It was over brunch. My parents and my person were the only ones in attendance. My parents had come to see me a few days after my friend had died, and they wanted to have a meal, and I wanted to eat with them. I wanted to taste something other than oversalted grief, so we sipped coffee and chatted and never looked at each other for too long. I am not a woman or a man, I said. Confetti cannon. My mom said, why couldn't you wait until I was dead? I said, I didn't want to wait until I was dead. My friend threw themselves a gender reveal party. Everyone called it a funeral. Again, I want to really shout outs, Susie for making this space, as well as everyone that's going to be joining us. I also received top surgery last year, and have been. I actually wrote this before top surgery because I was trying to again make sense of the mythic aspect of it, like what really happens. So this is gonna be my final poem, and thank you all. I'm really excited to chat. This poem is titled Waste. Scrape out the flesh with the back of your surgeon's knife. Render the fat over a fire of insurance denials and medical bills. Blend it into hand balm for winter, lipstick for drag night, oil a gun for hunting the ones who are hunting us. Make votive candles for your mother. She can light them, may she light them when she doesn't know how else to praise your offering. Take your empty skin and tan the hide in cow brain. Rinse it in the salt you carried for the dead. See how what was you becomes supple and bloodless. Sew the leather into coin purses. Pass them around at the next open mic. If anything is left, bury it. May it feed generations of flies and roots. These, your descendants, who ate from you to grow stronger. Most medical waste is incinerated. You know this. When what was once you joins the bags of fetid blood and ruined organs, you thank the fire for its mercy, how it could have taken all of you. In my favorite dreams, I put my bed beside my sister. As pieces fall from me, I offer them to her. Say, this came to me, but it belongs to you. Please, love this some way I never could. Please, let nothing here be waste. Thank you all very much. I'm really excited.
So I'm crying. That's just what we're doing during this. That's fine. I'm team normalize crying. Let's just get into it. I feel like we should all, as a society, cry more. Let's just cry with our friends. Let's cry with strangers. Let's get into it.
Let's cry on the internet. Let's cry on the internet.
I feel like it's what I've been doing for 2 years. It's a practice now. I feel like I'm, cultivating the skill of crying on the internet. And so I thank you for helping me do that today. DL, you've already made me cry a lot. And that's good for me. It's good for all of us. And thank you so much for reading those beautiful poems to us. And I look forward to the conversation we're going to get into about them. So thank you very much again. I don't know which poem got lost in that mix, but I'm pretty excited about what we got to hear from both of you tonight so far. So now it is my pleasure and my privilege to introduce our third guest this evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you are. I don't want to just be centrist because it's a different time all over the world, and I'm not sure where all of you are. So, but I hope it's good, whatever time it is. Either way, I get to introduce our third reader, Addie Tsai. Addie Tsai, who uses any and all pronouns, is a queer, non-binary artist and writer of color who teaches and lives in Houston, Texas. She also teaches in Goddard College's MFA in Interdisciplinary Arts program and Regis University's Mile High MFA program. They collaborated with Dominic Walsh Dance Theater on Victor Frankenstein and Camille Claudel, among others. Addie holds an MFA from Warren Wilson College and a PhD in dance from Texas Women's University. Addie is the author of the young adult novel Dear Twin and Unwieldy Creatures. Their queer, biracial, gender-swapped retelling of Frankenstein is forthcoming from Jaded Ibis Press in fall 2022. Their writing has been published in Foglifter, Vida Lit, Bonango Street, Bee Stung, The Offing, The Collegist, The Feminist Wire, Nat Brute, and elsewhere. She is fiction co-editor and editor of features and reviews at Anomaly, contributing staff writer at Spectrum South, and founding editor and editor-in-chief at Just Femme and Dandy. And I will share some links about Addie and where you can find Addie's work momentarily. But first, let's say hello and welcome to Addie Tsai. I'm so glad you're here tonight.
I am so glad to be here. Thanks so much for having me. This is incredible so far. I'm super excited. Yeah.
So nice to see your face, and I can't wait to hear from you. Thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to read something totally different, and now I'm inspired to change what I was going to read after M and DL. So let's see how it goes. I'm going to read an excerpt from Unwieldy Creatures, which is my queer biracial gender swapped retelling of Frankenstein, which is coming out in August, which is also Mary Shelley's birth month. So I'm very excited about that. And then if I have time, I'm going to read one really short poem after that. I am in Texas, so I'm just really appreciating this centering of queer and trans lives, joys, and bodies. So with that in mind, I'm going to read this excerpt. I'm trying to. The only thing you need to know is that Ezra is this character's brother. Hannah and I immediately formed a bond, the likes of which I had never before experienced with anyone, who was far more complex than the charming attachment even Ezra and I had with one another. As Hannah and I got to know each other, I learned that her father was Japanese and her mother was from Virginia. And so we spent many hours commiserating on what it was like to have within us such differing, warring worlds. Her father was a simple furniture salesman and her mother waitressed in a diner down the street from the bookstore. At times, she would sing at jazz clubs in the larger cities that were close by. I knew the minute that Hannah told me that her mother was a waitress which restaurant she worked at, as her similarly untamed curls and striking beauty were hard to miss. I giggled when I told her this and hid my face in my hand to hide my blushing skin. That's when Hannah knew that when I told her I remembered her mother's beauty, I meant it to reveal what I thought of her as well. I had never told another girl I was drawn to her or even admitted that I was attracted more to girls than to boys. I wouldn't exactly say that I consciously made my attraction known to Hannah either. It was as though the impulse to reveal my innermost feelings for Hannah came from within my body, but also beyond it. And I didn't think about the ramifications before I told her what she meant to me. It took time for Hannah to respond with her feelings in kind. I knew she felt somewhat the same for me by her acceptance of my attractions towards her, for not withdrawing from me when it was clear I meant to court her. I would later learn she had surprisingly accepting parents who were also her greatest confidants. They had guided her well and taught her not to rush into new relationships. I would later become resentful that Hannah had the kind of parents a young queer person would dream of, not only because she could rely on them for support, but also because it was wanting to stay close to them that ultimately kept me farther from her. I didn't know what kind of a romantic partner I was, for there was never anyone I fell for who would have brought those aspects of my character out of me. When I became attracted to girls I passed by in the square on my way to the bookstore or the library, I never allowed myself to indulge in the feelings, which faded away quickly. When I met Hannah, I had been waist high in my intellectual pursuits, and romantic encounters or love was the last thing on my mind. Nothing tended to conquer my passion for my studies. As Hannah and I became closer, I was surprised to find lurking within me the predilections and impulses of a gentleman. It was not only the manner I desired to pursue Hannah that felt most gentlemanly, it was also how I wanted to dress myself for the occasions I would take Hannah out on the town, and other patterns of behavior inspired by my favorite Elizabethan novels and films that felt gentlemanly. Over the course of our relationship, we would spend time having dinner with Hannah's parents, which brought up for me a myriad of complicated feelings. Hannah's parents had a sweetness with each other I wanted desperately to witness between my own parents. All I had seen my parents express was anger and fear. Still, it was deeply affirming to have Hannah's parents seem truly happy for us, to share our love with any other people beside the two of us. Her parents were a true partnership, even all the way down to the dinner table. We would have ramen and homemade sushi next to collard greens and chicken fried steak. It was impossible to resist their charms. Ever so often, Hannah's father would touch his hand to the small of her mother's back or beam at her with just a look, and it was enough to bring me to tears. Shortly after we met, I planned to borrow the family car and drive Hannah to a nearby city, where they were staging a queer adaptation of Romeo and Juliet. We had made a plan that we would dress for the occasion, even if we were the only ones to do so. We were young queers in love. In order to fully take on the fantasy I was eager to lavish on Hannah, I needed money not made readily available to me. It required confiding in someone. My grandmother was too conventional and would never understand. I tried my mother and hoped for the best, for I knew if I misjudged her ability to accept me, it could have disastrous consequences. On one of our outings into town, I sat in the car with my mother while we waited for Ezra to finish perusing his favorite gallery's latest exhibition. Ma, I started, unsure of how to begin. My mother looked out the window aimlessly. It was only after she heard me clear my throat she realized this was no ordinary conversation. What is it? Is it Ezra? Did Pa do something? My mother's line of questions made me feel worse for bringing this up, for wanting dapper outfits and my mother's support of a brand new romance, which might not even go anywhere, when there are far graver concerns to consider in our lives. But my heart needed her approval. No, nothing like that, Ma. Remember that new friend I told you about, Hana? My mother exhaled and started looking out the window again. Oh, yes, her father Japanese, right? Mother's pretty, works in restaurants and sings out of town. I blushed, thinking of Hana again. Yes, that's her. Well, but I'm taking her out next week to see a play, a date, and I want to dress like a Kalilai. My mother said nothing at first, just raised her eyebrows, darkened and shaped with black coal. Date? A Kalilai? Really? How did you learn this? You know this does not come from our region, right? The anxiety of the moment overwhelmed me. Yes, I know. In a book I found at the bookstore, but that's the easiest way to explain how I feel, I said sheepishly. Kalilai was a term I read in a book I found on the Bugis, the largest ethnic group in South Sulawesi, Indonesia. Their language accounts for 5 different gender categories, and Kalilai is their gender term for masculine women. The first time I read the passage in the book, my skin tingled in recognition and validation of a way my body felt that I'd never heard or even knew existed. And even better, it was a word that came from the same country as my own mother, as close to my birthright as I could get. You are dressing for fun, like costume? Or you really feel you're Kalilai? She peered into my eyes, which I kept downward. I didn't know how to answer her, so I started to cry, holding my head in my hands. My mother had never been one for my tears. She awkwardly patted my shoulder, then roughly grabbed my chin with one hand and demanded it upwards to look back at her. Okay, Zoe, okay. You must be very careful because you do not know what these Texans, even in parts of Indonesia, even when we have words for, people that are different, it is still not easy. And there's your father to worry about. Be careful, okay? And you must never call yourself Kalilai publicly, especially to Indonesians. It is not our language to claim. Okay? I nodded. But where is this play? Once my mother started talking logistics, I knew it would be okay. It is not here. It is far away. Okay, do you need money for outfit? I nodded again, wiping the tears from my face now that I saw Ezra walking towards our car. Zoelle, listen. She stroked my hair then, an impulse that was infrequent, but of a comfort to me. Do not tell Ezra about this. Do not tell your father. And be very careful how you are with her or any girl in public. This is for your own good, understand? The world can be hard. It is too harsh already to us. Oh, and your grandmother, your Nanek, she will never understand. I will hide some money for outfit in your pillowcase. She paused for a beat, thinking. I think she is a nice girl, she said slowly, and the smallest smile inched across her mouth. I grinned as warmth radiated through my chest. Just a moment later, I saw Ezra walking towards the car, and so I tried to look as casual as possible. And so it was that I learned I was Kalilai and to keep it secret. I picked Hana up in our family car the day of the play, wearing a deep purple waistcoat, a pink ruffled blouse with a high neck, and forest green men's trousers I had my father's tailor alter for my shape. I went to the barbershop on the way. It was a Thursday night, a day I knew the one woman barber worked, and I asked her to give me a men's cut with a tight fade. I can't articulate how it felt to come into my own body, my own style, my own Kalilai. She knew that I was about to head to my first date, and so she sprinkled talcum powder against my neck, and as she brushed it against my skin, I sighed with pleasure at my new self, and with my mother's blessing. I only hoped Hana would approve. Hana looked ravishing. Her red hair shone in a way it hadn't before. She wore an ankle-length blue pleated skirt, a green satin button-down blouse, and soft pink ballet flats made to look like point shoes, with a box toe and thick straps across the front. Her lips were painted a sparkling mauve, and her jade drop earrings shone against the rapidly dissolving daylight. As usual, she took my breath away, but it was deeply reassuring to see her react to my transformation. Impulsively, Hana took one hand and rubbed it against the back of my neck. I sighed audibly as Hana beamed at me, a smile I'd never seen before, as though she were seeing me for the first time. I guess we both were. Okay, and then I just want to read a poem really fast. Thank you so much. Okay, this one is called How to Start Over. First, cut your hair. And when you shed threads of your previous self, shed also those who didn't honor you. And with that, the need to please abusers and narcissists, pathological and merciless. Leave them on the cutting room floor. Go to therapy. When you dress in the morning, take a long look at the subject in the reflecting glass before you. Carve a new self out of the possible subjects that take form in your wardrobe, one disinterested in any other lens than the one your eyes peer out of. Buy yourself French tulips and watch them start over, just as you do, winding and bending their way through a new container, their hair also cut, like yours. Soak in lavender salts, write it out, even when it feels inappropriate, especially when it does. When you go to therapy, which you know that you must, bring yourself into the room. Bring tear-stained cheekbones, gaping rage, wounded heart. Become bedfellows with boundaries. Do not listen to those who respond to a start over with envy or discomfort at what your start over may force them to confront. You know more than anyone else the collateral damage. To start over, casualties, all cells of dead skin left in your wake. In order to start over, you must envision yourself as a new babe in the woods. Gradually accumulate the blocks of sound and meaning to construct a new language, a new speech, a new body for that mouth to work. Travel to a land where no one knows your name or your face, your body an undiscovered jewel. Inhale the assurance of anonymity. Walk deep into a forest you have never known, a forest no one can intrude upon. Take a seat between roots and current, accompanied only by those who know something of starting over, a bird with a new skin, a toad learning a new song. Hold out your hands. Clasp between them your deadened locks, your wounded villains, the perception of your frauds and exposures. If you're feeling generous, bury them beneath the roots of a tree which provides you comfort. If you're feeling vengeful, drown them in the rivers. They know a thing or two of renewal. Cradle the sufferer and the suffered that lies within you, like a child left swaddled in a wicker basket, sailing in a river visited by no one. Fill the basket with the hair filings of the self you no longer recognize. Burn it. Thank you.
I really love how all of you just read this devastating, burn to the ground work and then end on a thank you. Well, okay, let's just get into it. We're going to cry some tears. And I think that was a beautiful, beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much, Addie. I also even heard some notes from that poem that called back to some of DL's poem, right? Talking about vengeance and talking about burying things at trees. So well, this went full circle, and I'm so glad that we're all here. Thank you so much, all of you, for your incredible writing. This has been absolutely beautiful. And of course, our audience, if you would like to ask any questions of any of these authors, please feel free to share them in the chat. But I'm going to ask a question first because I want to know a little bit more about, in listening to you. So I think of a lot of the work when I think about like, what is your imagined audience and what is your hope for your work to do? I think about a lot of the work that we do with the Word is really about like fighting cultural erasure, right? And just saying like, we exist. Look at all of these people who exist, all of these people who have been marginalized, all of these people who the world has attempted to erase or destroy. Like we're here, we exist. And also we're brilliant. You're welcome. I feel very much like that's true for each of you. And I'm wondering though, I mean, I don't want to project like my meaning on your work. And I'd love to know what you think about kind of what you hope your work is going to do in the world. What do you want for it to do?
It's such a big question.
It is. Think about what you read tonight. If it went out into the world to do something, what would you want it to do? What are your hopes for it?
Part of why I write is a pursuit of joy. Storytelling is my people's way of history, and it's part of our existence and identity. And like you were saying, we have managed to persist and exist for centuries despite being actively oppressed, tried to be erased, and genocide. And we still see several of those tools being used against the communities that we identify with. And writing is something that has always brought me joy, that's brought me meaning, that helps me envision a future in which I exist. So I hope to be able to provide that for other people with my work. It's like, look, this life is full with so much suffering, but we can still find joy. We can still find community and love and fight for what we believe in our dreams. And we can get there, I hope to be able to provide that kind of hope for other people who read my work.
Thank you, Dia. Anyone else want to weigh in on my very lightweight questions?
I mean, I feel like I have a pretty short and simple answer. I just want people to not feel alone in the world. It's a lot easier to find community as like a young queer trans person with the internet, but I know that when I was growing up, there was no one, and I did not think there was anyone like me. I mean, the few queer people I knew were all white. They were men, or presented as men, and there was no internet. So like, if they were not around you, like they sort of didn't exist. So, so that's part of it. I want, I want what I want as a reader. Like I want to also feel in community and to feel, that there's someone else that understands some aspect of what I've experienced. But I would also say that the excerpt I read today does something similar that my queer YA dear twin was trying to do, which is imagine for myself a queer past in which I would have been accepted, but within the cultural structure of what I was navigating. And so, and I think we all are tired of marginalized people only being written about through the pain and woundedness and trauma. And so I am trying to sort of show like a different idea that doesn't get rid of like the conflict, but just hopefully ends in joy and reclamation, I think. Yeah.
And a purple jacket with a pink blouse and forestry.
Exactly. I mean, details. We need the details.
It really is. But as a teenager, like that is the bigger question. You're like, what am I gonna wear? It's so rich. Like those details were excellent.
I mean, I think that my answer is like, I want to write for beloveds. So, and I was like, being able to be in this audience with y'all, like that felt like I got to be in the front row, like as a beloved or as the person that was supposed to be hearing this work, for all of the reasons that you all already said. And so I think like who my audience is for, the person that needs that work at that moment, or needs like a name that they wouldn't have known without finding that work or being told that like this is a name. So that's how I like to approach my work and who I want to be writing for and towards.
Thank you very much for your answers. As I was listening to you, like, so part of what I was thinking about when I invited all of us, like, oh, this is going to be a delicious conversation between the three of them. I was really thinking all of you write poetry plus, right? And so I get very poetry centric in my brain because that's my primary boo, is poetry. But then I was like, oh, they all write like beyond poetry and also include poetry in other forms. Like you all do a bunch of different things. Have you ever experienced like that space in the writer world? I think like in life world, but also in the literary world where there are like really, really hard boundaries that people want you to fit in, right? Like, well, what is it? What are you? Like all of these things, right? And it's just like this perpetuation of people's limited ideologies around like what a book can be, what literature is, like all of these very, very specific and like, well, it needs to be this many words and it has to be this. And if it's this, well, then it's not poetry. And if it's not this, then it's, and it can't be in the same book or in the same body and it can't come from the same writer, and all of these rules that people are really attached to, that all of you really explode. And that brings me a ton of joy because literature can be whatever we say it is. I think. So I want to know, like, how have you approached that? Like, where did you start? What was your primary love language when it comes to writing and reading? And how did you kind of expand that, or arts in general? Like, maybe it wasn't writing. Some people come to writing all kinds of ways. So what was your first like creative expression love, and how has that evolved?
I'll go. Okay, so I wanted to be a dancer, but I was pulled out of dance for financial reasons. Basically, I was raised by a single father, and so writing was free. I didn't need any. I didn't need to go to him to ask for any sort of financial access. And and also I was dealing with like pretty significant childhood trauma, so it was a way for me to process and to heal before finding therapy, before having access to other support. But dance was definitely my first love, and then poetry was my second. And then I got my master's in poetry when I was 22, and the internet was a baby, so like you really like where you got your MFA, or it was just like that's just what you did. I think if I came of age now, I'd probably do something really different, because I think that I think it really impacted my freedom around poetry. And so I got real stuck when I graduated. I was feeling really frustrated with how the poetry world was going about its business at the time, I guess I'll say. And it's a lot better now than it was then. But yeah, I was actually feeling very, very confined by the way that the people who were publishing poetry wanted poetry to be. I mean, we couldn't even a slam and spoken word was like a thing, it was just like so much. And I started feeling very confined by it. And so my poems turned into prose poems, turned into lyric essays, the was a sort of fluke that just kind of happened literally out of nowhere. So it's pretty hilarious to me that I'm going to have 2 novels and like not a book of poetry yet that I've like studied since I was 18. And Dear Twin has, to go back to what you were asking, Dear Twin has like words with friends messages and Instagram posts and footnotes. And I got rejected by a bunch of agents about it, and that it was too nuanced, too mannered. Yeah, just a lot of things. So for me, I feel like the real answers in the indie publishing market, because I feel like they're just willing to take the risks. And because of the way that the internet works, it has really neutralized, I feel like, the playing field in terms of getting those books out there. I mean, they may not end up on the bestseller list, but they get an audience. They find their way into the world. But there's something else you said, which is like, what are you? Which is, as a biracial person, I've been asked, it's the same thing, right? I've been asked it since I was 5 years old. And I feel like because I come from like 2 different cultural identities, and I'm non-binary, it's sort of like, I can't imagine being like one genre, because it wouldn't really reflect my, the complexity of how I live in the world. And so I'm just very thankful that I feel like we are in a place for multi-genre, for intertextuality. Our world is intertextual in a way that it was not when I started. And so I think there's huge potential now that there wasn't when I was coming of age. But I also like to remind students and other people that I talk to that, like, white dudes have been doing all kinds of weird stuff with genre forever. I always bring up David Foster Wallace. So I'm like, if he could do it in the 80s or whatever, we can do it too. And I'm tired. Like, there has been a precedent. There's been a long precedent in multi-genre work. And I think we just have to keep pushing it. And I think young readers, they're coming of age in like TikTok, and not just TikTok, Instagram, and all this stuff. But if you think about like just any piece of writing that's on the internet, it tends to have like a video. It tends to have multiple types of voices. It has, different tones and styles. So I feel like we are in that world. To me, it's much weirder to be rigid about genre than like the other way around, like in this current moment. So yeah.
Thank you, Addie. And I agree. It is like people hold tight to what they hold tight to because it's like it feels like the thing they can control maybe. And they're like, well, if this is, yeah, if you're doing what I'm doing, then maybe I'm not doing it right. It makes them have to, which, kind of like was hinted at, right? It's like really just forcing other people to like kind of understand their own boundaries and understandings around that. As you push it, they're like, wait, well, then who am I, right? If you're standing there, then where am I standing? I don't understand anymore. It's find it very destabilizing, which I think is great. People should be destabilized.
Agreed.
DL, do you have any thoughts on that?
On the previous question of like, how do we start out and being transgressive of genres?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was that little baby queer that always had a notebook under their arm wherever they went and was like jotting shit down, like in the corner whenever we had the opportunity. And what I was writing was books. I always wrote books, like from the jump. It was a long narrative. And many of them didn't get finished, but there were some that did. They were always genre bendy because several of my ideas are from my dreams. And dreams are fluid. They go in so many different directions, right? They're your unconscious trying to make sense of information. And taking that into, okay, now I'm going to figure out how to write this down on paper as a narrative that other people can understand. It's just going to be transgressive anyway. It's just going to be genre bending. Like my dreams have to do with like somebody in the Batman mobile, like sky, like flying into the sky that's raining cheeseburgers. So I don't know what that is. That seems surreal. So like trying to write that is probably going to be a little weird. And I love it. As I continued to step into more of my identity, I found poetry provided me with opportunities to get quick meaning to people. They didn't have to read like a long narrative in order to see where my brain was going or what was coming from my soul. It was just like, here's some bars. I'm out. So that's what that ended up turning into. And it's provided me with a lot of opportunities to reach like a wider audience. I didn't study writing or poetry. So I feel somewhat unconfined by that rigidity. But I know that in the past, I have replicated some of what you were talking about. Like, what is this? I don't know. And I feel for me, being a part of a writing community was essential in breaking through that habit of trying to classify things into boxes. Because several of the writers that are in my community are hybrid writers. And I didn't know what that was. And now I do. And I'm like, let's read all the hybrid shit and see how we can like incorporate that. Yay. It's just fun. So allowing yourself to break through boundaries just brings so much joy and fulfillment. And allows for the opportunity to be innovative and original.
Thank you. Yes. Innovation and originality. I feel like authenticity too, like, right? The same way that Addie was saying, like our lives are intertextual, like everything we do is that we don't live in these boundaries, right? Like everything we experience it all kinds of ways. M, has anyone ever told you that what you're doing is not poetry or is something different than poetry?
I think I did tell myself that too many times. And I think it was a lot. I think I had to work through a lot of like self-doubt when it came to poetry, which is definitely the first love. Like growing up in slam, like I had mentioned, I think I absorbed so much of the aesthetic of like you have to be legible in 3 minutes and then you got to get off stage. And I think that caused me to have difficulty shifting away from that when I was like, hey, my poems actually, they're not going to be 3 minutes anymore. They're not going to be 1 minute. They're just like this thing that I've been thinking about for a long time. And I think when I left poetry slam, it was kind of like this this incongruence, because it had been, you know, my whole community and my whole like a huge part of my identity, and not having that community made me feel like I couldn't write anymore, because I wasn't this poet anymore. And then when I started to like read, like, okay, well, like what are people doing that's not slam, I was like, this is kind of not great either. Some of this stuff is pretty boring. And so I was stuck, and it was actually getting into reading again and getting into another, like a love, but like not one that I ever identified as something that I could do, which was like, you know, like fantasy, science fiction, speculative fiction writ large, and obsessing over them in tandem, to be like, you know, speculative fiction, like there is some really prophetic shit in there, and that, you know, that is meaningful and powerful. And, you know, what is poetry but being able to imagine something that doesn't exist, or some, like, to imagine a world that you need to imagine, just to get through the next minute in this world. And so that's where I feel like my trajectory as a poet right now has led me. But it has been like, there's been like some incongruence, like I said, because I will go off on a tangent about Octavia Butler in my MFA classes, and everybody looks at me like I don't know what I'm talking about, because yeah. And I think that there's like, that is like what I'm continuing to step into and be, you know, enamored with and nourished by, is you know, being queer and being trans is a making, and it is like, it is a speculative fiction, you know, in your body. And so that's why, yeah, that's why genres are dumb.
I think that the first rule of living inside an Octavia Butler novel is to not talk about living inside an Octavia Butler novel. Is probably my favorite. Making the face like you're not supposed to say it out loud.
Oh my God.
We all know we're here. Like we're somewhere inside the parables, right? So DL, there's a question here from Caitlin who wants to know, can you talk a bit more about the water imagery in the work that you shared?
Oh, sure. Water is life, and it finds a way, you know, regardless of what obstacles get put in its way, it refuses to be contained. Even if you put up a reservoir or a dam, it gonna eat through that concrete eventually. Like it's just gonna do what it's gonna do. So it can't be contained. And I also appreciate how many different forms it can take. So I feel like water is transgressive. It's going to go past any barriers, and it's going to become what it wants to become. And in all of it, it is itself. It's not pretending to be anything else. It always is in its integrity. And I see trans people in that way, like transgressive. We are life. Even as you throw these boulders in the way, we gonna find a way. We gonna work through it. We gonna eat your laws. So that's often how I relate to oppression. Is like water finds a way, and so can I. I can find a way too.
Water finds a way, and so can I. That is a beautiful note. I know that we're like, I feel like we could just hang out and talk for several hours, but I also want to respect your time. And so I want to also ask this question. So Celeste had this question for you, Addie. I loved how you described the haircut in the final lines of the date, seeing the character for the first time, but it also being a moment of seeing themselves for the first time too. I want to know, like, you got really detailed about like the way that the characters were dressed and the way that they appeared and going through that process. And I wonder, like, can you talk a little bit more about why that's so important to share in this story?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a hugely radical moment for the first time a queer person um, dons the look of the person that they were always meant to be and that they didn't have access to ordinarily. And I guess for me, like what was, obviously that moment is really important because Zoelle sort of understands who she is, not just who she always has been, but like what this romance sort of like makes her aware of within herself. But also we don't have that many stories from, I haven't read that many queer Asian stories, in particular queer and trans Asian stories, where we get to see that. And so I wanted to place that in a very particular Asian context, but also, not everyone gets to grow up in San Francisco or New York. Sometimes you grow up in the South, and like what happens with that character actually is she then starts to kind of like live this double life where she has this like secret treasure trove of outfits that she wears like with her girlfriend, and then she like wears what her father basically won't react to in the home. And so it's this sort of going back and forth, because I think that is an experience that a lot of queer and trans people face, is that dressing as oneself is both reclamation of one's identity, but also comes with risk and comes with danger. And we're seeing that that's still, I mean, with what's happening in Texas around trans children and youth, we're seeing that this is not going anywhere. We're having to continue to fight for that. So it felt like a really important moment, but also a moment where a moment of joy too, where and I feel like this is like another thing that queer people love to do, right? Is cosplay and like dress up and play with their identity in a lot of different ways. And so I just wanted to show like a tiny moment of what that can look like. As you know, I really love fashion. I love thinking about fashion. I like thinking about the way that fashion communicates both a singular identity as well as participating within a communal structure. And so I always want to put outfits and colors and fabrics in it. And also, like you're reading something, right? So like use as many senses that can be accessed by as many different types of people, I think, that as one can do. But and then a lot of it is like, oh, what I would wear to Romeo and Juliet if I had money.
I love it. And I also want to just note, like, all of your really fly outfits right now, like everybody all in your button ups, like just looking all cool, like these flamingos with the tie deal.
I know.
The print that you have on it, like it's all happening. Like you all came to slay, and I love it with both the fashion and the words. And I thank you so much for doing so and for busting my heart open tonight. And I'm so glad that you're here. I'm so glad that I got to hear from you. I realize that I've kept you too long. And I'm going to thank our audience now for being here with us tonight. You can tune in to these talks. This will live on YouTube, so you can watch it again and again. Share it with your friends. Pop some popcorn or whatever your preferred snack is. Might be Sour Patch Kids to reference DL's introduction this evening. Grab some Sour Patch Kids, grab some friends. Watch it again, listen to these poems, cry, but also most importantly, check out these authors. Find their work, Google them on the google.com, type in their names, and then support whatever projects they're working on, which are going to be many and varied and all over the place. You can find them on social media. You can find them in your dreams. You can find them in your hopes and prayers, particularly M. McDonough, who is stealthy. The best place to find it.
Everything.
So thank you all again so much. Thank you to our audience for checking in. Thank you for being here. And I hope you will join us for the next Margins Meets conversation, which will be March 17th when we'll be talking to, well, I'll tell you more about it later. But thank you again for being here tonight. And one more round of applause for all of our readers today here in the chat. I see your comments coming through. And thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.